formally introduce him in a minute. Today's topic, extremely contemporary in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic in India and all across the world. The topic is the Sutra model for pandemic modeling from IIT Kanpur, looking back, looking forward. A few words about the Alumni Center Chennai and our webinar series. The series is designed to bring together the best of the Alumni Center's ecosystem in a mixed physical digital manner. The initial 4 or 5 sessions have been online only. And since now the center is open at IIT Madras Research Park for the last few weeks, we will be starting hopefully a suitable mix of online and physical sessions shortly. There are several topic streams, and more will be added as we get more feedback from all of you. The idea is that these topics are picked for special interests as well as width of interest. So we have already had Faculty Researcher of the Month, and I had the privilege of hosting Professor Krishnan Balasubramaniam of IIT Madras as our inaugural speaker in that Faculty Researcher section. We have a mixed bag or a potpourri session. We kicked that off when Vijay Kamalakara, CEO of Story Trails, talked about unexpected tales behind Indian monuments. The Startup of the Month series kicked off with Planis Technologies, an exciting startup from IIT Madras Research Parks a couple of weeks ago. And last week, we had, in collaboration with iTunes, another initiative of the Alumni Center, we hosted Three Brothers and a Violin, which was an extremely interesting session as well on the fusion music that this group has pioneered in India. Tomorrow, I will be actually hosting our first joint session with IIT Madras alumni, and Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy will be talking about 5GI, the extension of 5G in the India context. And just following that, following Saturday, Meenakshi Ramesh will be hosting our first quiz as well. So as you can see, there is a great variety of speakers. Different parts of the alumni ecosystem are coming together, and so on. So the last 4, 6, 7 weeks have been very exciting, and please look forward to more exciting things to come. Now let me introduce Professor Agarwal. He's extraordinarily distinguished in many ways. His specialization is in the theory of computation and computational number theory. He's a BTech Computer Science and Engineering from IIT Kanpur batch of 86 and a PhD from IIT Kanpur batch of 91. His academic and research experience spans across IIT Kanpur, Chennai Mathematical Institute. He was a Humboldt Fellow at the University of Ulm in Germany. He's a member of the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton, a distinguished visiting professor at the National University of Singapore. Over 60 publications in top international journals and conferences. He has been the head of the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, the Dean of Resource Planning and Generation, Dean of Faculty Affairs, and most recently, Deputy Director of IIT Kanpur. Today, he is a professor at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Kanpur. And if I may now come to the most interesting part of his profile, he is a Padma Shri. He's the winner of the Infosys Prize, the Fulkerson Prize, the Gödel Prize, which is widely regarded as the Nobel in mathematical and computer science. And the Gödel Prize was for a problem called primes in P, which is truly one of those really, really high-profile, long-running problems in computer science. So congratulations, sir. And he's, of course, a winner of the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award, Fellow of the National Academy of Sciences, the World Academy of Sciences, Indian National Science Academy, Indian Academy of Sciences. And I think, Professor Agarwal, you're a Fellow of the National Academy of Engineering as well. So I didn't see that on your bio, but I'm fairly sure that you're an INA Fellow as well. So welcome, sir, to the inaugural session. And thank you for accepting our invitation so readily. You and your group have amply proved that it is possible to carry out world-class research in India, and most importantly, do research which is extraordinarily application-oriented as well. And the pandemic is one such example. So, just to set you off on your slides, the COVID-19 pandemic is now well into its second year all across the world. What have we learnt about it, about the way it has progressed, and how well can we forecast this pandemic now? And I'm sure the audience will be very interested in hearing your views formally in your slides. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for a very, very generous introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be here in front of all the alumni of various IITs. Uh, and I'm sure many of you may be wondering that somebody working in computer science, how does person end up doing modeling of a pandemic? Well, COVID has made a lot of us do things which we never thought we will do. So it's just one of those things. It just happened to get involved into this, and one thing led to another. And here we are. So I want to start with sharing the slides, and I hope this is visible to everyone.
Yeah, you can see. Thank you.
And I'm going to talk about the Sutra model, which three of us created for COVID modeling. And I'll take you through some very brief history of modeling, and then motivate the Sutra model. It's one unique characteristic, I would say, is that it can tolerate imperfection in data fairly well and still make useful inferences. And that's one place where it somewhat differs from the earlier models. Okay, so let's start with the modeling of pandemic. And I'll just run through one model. There have been many models of various pandemics. But the whole story of this started from the Spanish flu time when there was this, a lot of records were kept at the time of deaths, and this is a very well circulated graph of deaths in UK. And as one can see, there are three peaks, and there is a lull period in between. And second and third peaks are quite sharp. And it was asked that why did this happen? Can we understand the reasons behind why it happened? And that led to the first model for pandemics by Kermack and McHenry called SIR model. And what they do is something very simple. They split the population into three groups. Susceptible are those who are not yet infected. Infected are those who are currently infected. And removed are those who were infected in the past, but are no longer infected. And the transition clearly is from susceptible to infected and infected to removed. Removed, just to make it clear, also includes those who died in the pandemic. Now, in order to model this transition from one category to other, what they did was to introduce these three fractional variables. S of t represents the fraction of population which is in susceptible category at time t. Similarly, I of t is infected fraction, and R of t is the removed fraction. Clearly, since they are fractional, their sum is 1. And use this representation, they derived the transition rate from susceptible to infected and infected to removed category. Here is the transition rate from susceptible to infected category. And the logic for this is quite simple. Actually, one can argue this in multiple ways. Here is perhaps the simplest way of arguing that susceptible person becomes infected when he or she comes into contact with an infected person. Now, if S represents the total susceptible fraction and I represents total infected fraction, then the number of possible ways that a susceptible can meet infected is proportional to S times I. And with some constant of proportionality, that there is some probability that when a susceptible meets infected, the person gets actually infected, that all that can be captured in this parameter of the bandwidth called beta, and that defines the rate at which susceptible are moving to infected. Minus beta times I, minus because susceptible category is always reducing. And now to model infected to removed category, well, it's even easier. The more infected people are there, the more in a day will move to the removed category. So the rate at which removed category is changing is just proportional to the size of infected category. So you write it as gamma times I. And that, of course, gives the rate at which infected category is changing. Beta Si comes in at time C and gamma I moves out at time T. Now, these three equations almost completely defined, except that if you want to model the deaths, which are a subset of the removed category. So then if you introduce a new variable, again fractional one, d of t, representing the mortality fraction, and its rate at which mortalities are happening is again depends on or proportional to the size of infected category. So you just set it to another parameter eta times I. So with these three parameters, beta, gamma, and eta, once you know the values of this, then you can completely define the trajectory of the pandemic. And Carmack and McKendrick were able to explain that somewhat unusual behavior seen in the graph shown for UK. There is another notion which is very widely known as called herd immunity. This is reached when infections reach at their peak and after that they start coming down. And that is can be simply analyzed by setting di by dt to 0 so as to get S to be equal to gamma over beta. And this ratio beta over gamma is also very well known, called basic reproduction number, or R naught. So when S is 1 over R naught is the time when herd immunity is reached. This also tells us if R naught happens to be less than equal to 1, it means that the pandemic doesn't exist, it will decay. So only when R naught is greater than 1 that pandemic actually proceeds. And the higher R naught value is, the smaller value of S is required to reach herd immunity, which means pandemic gets a lot more time to spread. Now, with this model, what we can conclude is firstly, it's a very simple model, very easy to simulate. And it seems to be able to explain the trajectory of a few pandemics quite well. So if we can estimate the values of parameters governing this model, then we have a good handle on the predicting future trajectory of a pandemic. There are three parameter values that I have already identified. And the question is, can one estimate their value from the data? Because that will be the ideal, instead of trying to estimate it in other ways. So we can just observe the data, that is daily new infections, daily new deaths, and be able to estimate this. It can be done quite easily if the data provided is accurate. And just to give an example, let me explain how can beta parameter be estimated. For that, I introduce a new variable, also a fractional one, n of t, which is the fractional value of the new infections introduced at time t. So therefore, n is simply minus ds by dt, which means n is simply beta times s times I.
So your slide has not moved from the parameter values from data. That's the last slide that at least I'm seeing.
Oh, it's not moving?
Yeah, I'm seeing the slide which was let us see how to estimate beta.
Yeah.
And then it just stopped. So perhaps you might have to
let me just
stop sharing and unshare and share again.
Okay. So
yeah, now we can start.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
thank you.
So if you let n of t denote a new variable, which is a fraction, it's a fractional variable, fraction of population which gets infected at time t. We have already derived that that is beta times s times I, so n is beta si. Now s plus I plus r is 1, so you just substitute for s, reject the equation and get I is equal to 1 over beta times n plus I plus r times I. Now these are fractional variables. And if you look at the data that would be available for any pandemic, it will be in actual numbers, not in fractions. So let's just convert it into actual numbers. Represent n hat of t to be just population p naught times n of t. So this is the actual number of new infections at time t. Similarly, I hat of t is just population times I, r hat is population times r. And just clear the denominator, and the same equation can be written in terms of actual reported numbers, I hat, n hat, and r hat. Now, this is a relationship between these three quantities. I hat is the currently active number of infections, n hat is the new reported infections, and r hat is the recoveries made so far, or removal so far. And there is this relationship between these three quantities. And if we can measure these quantities, then beta estimation is straightforward. The problem is that generally in any pandemic, we never get a completely accurate value of I hat, n hat, or r hat. What happens is that any time when the cases are reported, they are a subset of the actual number of cases. So what you get to see is not n hat, but is something smaller, and it could be significantly smaller. And then your estimation of beta will go off clearly. And that is the reason why epidemiologists do not extract or estimate values of parameters using data, because data is error prone. Instead, what they do is, for example, to estimate beta, they look at beta essentially controls how fast infection is spreading, and that will also can be gauged by looking at mobility data of a region, density of population of a region, the infectivity of the particular virus one is studying, and so on. So they look at all these other methods or values, and then from that infer the value of beta, and similarly other parameters. Now, since SIR model came into being, there have been several other models, more or less a variation or expansion of the SIR model that have been proposed. I'll not go into details of those. Instead, directly come to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is in one way different from earlier pandemics, is because there have been an extremely large number of asymptomatic cases. Now, the problem with asymptomatic cases is that it's very hard to detect them. I mean, if a person doesn't realize that he or she is infected, there is no way that others will figure out. And yet, the asymptomatic patients continue to be carriers or transmitters of the virus. So here is the problem, that there are a lot of carriers of the virus who cannot be detected unless you adopt a very widespread testing mechanism. And still you won't be able to detect everyone. So this makes this any attempt to use data to estimate the parameter values kind of a very difficult exercise, despite the fact that perhaps this is the first time when very extensive data about the pandemic is available. The second challenge one faced when with respect to COVID-19 modeling is that earlier pandemics would spread very fast over whatever region one is studying, because not many efforts were made to contain its spread. In contrast, with COVID, huge amount of efforts have been spent to contain it by all the governments, more or less. Some with greater success, some with lesser success, but efforts have been made quite extensively. So, which means that at a given point in time, like I just described earlier, when you converted fractional variables to actual numeric variables, then just multiply with population of the region. But if the pandemic is not even spread over the entire region, then your effective population is not the entire population, but the population of the part of the region where the pandemic is currently active. So that is an additional challenge that one has to be able to address in order to predict the trajectory properly. No model has studied this aspect yet. It's very easy to incorporate that into model if you by simply allowing the population itself to be a function of time. And P of t is the population over which the pandemic is active at time t, which we call within the reach of the pandemic. And you just define a new parameter rho to be the ratio of the population at time t and the population overall of the region. So rho then becomes a parameter whose value lies between 0 and 1. It starts at the time of the beginning of the pandemic. At that time, it's very close to 0 and eventually comes close to 1. We call this parameter the reach of the pandemic. So while it is easy to model this change in the reach of the pandemic, it just brings in one more parameter into the play. And I've already seen or argued that it's hard to estimate parameter values from data, and one has to use alternative mechanisms. So one more parameter means additional headache. How do you estimate the value of this parameter? Like I said, with respect to COVID-19, one good thing that happened is that extensive data is available, even at district level. But that comes with the caveat that the reported numbers may be nowhere close to the actual numbers. And indeed, a lot of sero surveys done have indicated that. So is there a way to make use of the reported number and get some useful information from that? Well, let's investigate it. And I'm going to propose a hypothesis. But before that, I have to define some more variables. This is the reported version of the earlier variables. N sub t is the fraction of the population which was reported to be infected at time t. So this is a number which is a fractional value which is much smaller than n of t. That's the actual number of infections at time t. And n sub t is only reported number of or fraction of our infections at time t. Similarly, capital T of t is the fraction of reported active infections. This is a much smaller number compared to I of t. And thirdly, R sub t of t is against the reported version of the removed fraction. So these are again fractional variables, and we can convert them into the numeric number, actual number variables by multiplying them with the underlying population, which now at time t is rho times p naught. So t hat is rho times p naught t, rt hat is rho times p naught rt, and nt hat is rho times p naught nt. Now these three quantities, t hat, rt hat, and nt hat, are the ones that are available to us as a time series, one for every day. Because these are only reported versions, and that's exactly what is available. So the hypothesis I'm proposing, and that's where we started from, is that these quantities also satisfy a relationship which is very similar to the actual quantities satisfying the relationship. If you just recall, I hat, n hat, and I r hat were related with this relationship. 1 over beta here and 1 over p naught here. Their reported versions, t hat, nt hat, and rt hat, are similarly related in this way. The only difference here is that the constant on this relationships have changed. We have b here instead of 1 over beta, and we have e here instead of 1. So this is just a hypothesis. The question is it true? The good thing is that it's easy to verify if it is true, because again, these are all reported quantities, so we know that them daily values are there. So we just, what this is hypothesizing is that t hat, nt hat, and t hat plus rt hat times t hat, they lie on a plane. This, if you take these for every time instant, if you take this 3-dimensional point, set of all those points lie on a plane. Or in other words, t hat minus b times nt hat for a suitable value of b, and t hat plus rt hat times t hat, they lie on a line passing through the origin. So all we need to do is to see if the actual data and check if the relationship holds. And let's start, let's look at the data for India. This is the time when the pandemic started in the country, March end to April end, about a month's data. These blue dots are these plots, daily values of t minus b times n, comma t times t plus rt. Okay, t hat minus b times n t hat. I'm sorry, the hat is missing here. So this is exactly what we wanted to check. This is the hypothesis that these two quantities are have a satisfy a linear relationship. And as you can see, these points indeed certify to that. This light brown line is the one they are very closely, all the points are very close to. The agreement is measured by this R square value. For those of you who are familiar with regression, will realize that R square being 0.998 suggests that it's a very good fit. The value of B and E for which this relationship holds is 3.86 and E being 39,164. And all the data I have worked, I'm going to show is available publicly. Now continuing, this is April end to June end period, 2 months long. Again, the points lie very nicely on this light brown line. R square value of the fit is even better. The value of B and E have changed, 6.38 and 970. And continuing, this is July end to August end. Again, excellent fit. Value of B and E have changed further. September end to beginning November, again very good fit. B and E have changed. November mid to December end, B and E again changed. Fit stays very good. January, and as you can see, I'll just run through this. March. This is the last one I'm going to show is April end to May end. Again, an excellent fit. B and E value have changed further. So if you look at the entire timeline from the beginning of pandemic till today, about 2/3 of the points satisfy this property of lying on a line. But as observed, for different time period, the value of B and E are different. And in fact, there are 11, the entire timeline can be split into 11 phases. In each phase, there is one value of B and E that rules, and then across the phases, those values change. And in fact, if you observe, for India has gone through 11 phases, as I mentioned, if you observe these values of E for those 11 phases, it starts very high and continuously comes down, as you can see here. And it's now, for last few phases, fairly stable. Is this a phenomenon that is unique to India? Well, no. We have simulated now large number of countries, all states in India and nearly all districts of the country. Every one of them shows exactly the same phenomenon. That this equation, firstly, the timeline can be split into phases, but in each phase, a specific value of B and E is there for which the equation holds for majority of days. So this gives rise to the following question. Firstly, that hypothesis seems to be mostly true. Why is it true? Why is it only mostly true? Why is not always true? So the equation fails to hold for about 1/3 of days. And another curious phenomena that I observed is this rapidly decreasing value of P. So what is happening there? These questions were answered by our model, and I'll briefly describe the model that we have. What we do is, this is very similar to SIR model, except that we now have 4 categories for the population. Susceptible is the same one. The infected category is split into 2 categories. First is undetected. So these are infected people who are not detected. Next is tested positive. So these are infected who are tested positive, so they are detected. And then fourth is same as earlier, removed. The transition diagram is somewhat different. Susceptible, when they get infected, initially are undetected, so they move to undetected. Some undetected test positive, and so they move to this component. Most of them don't test positive, so they actually directly go to the removed. And tested positive, eventually all go to removed. So the name of the model is derived from the first letters of these 4 categories, SUTR, and we have just added A for approach in the end. So as for SIR model, we can set up equations for this. There is one innovation here that we have done, which has provided us with a way to use the reported data and estimate the parameter values. So I'll highlight that point. So given that 5 groups there, we define the 5 fractional variables as before. The sum of them is all 1. Notice that the removed category is being split into 2 parts, removed from undetected and removed from tested positive. The dynamics more or less remains the same. The change in the new infections created are proportional to S times U. Only U, because those who test positive get quarantined, so they are not infecting others. So it's only those who are in U infect others. Then change in RU or RT is same as earlier, as in SIR model. Change in U, beta SU comes in at every day, who are the newly infected people. Gamma U get removed and moved to RU or get here. Then some move to the tested positive, and then some number I'm denoting as N sub T, because this is what I have already defined earlier. N sub T is the fraction of those who test positive at time T. So N sub T move from undetected to tested positive. Similarly, change in T is N sub T come in and gamma T move out. So everything is now fixed except deciding what N sub T should be. If you look at earlier models, which I have not described here, some of them come close to what we are doing, and they define N sub T to be delta times U. But that's not a good choice, because due to contact tracing protocol to detect cases, one can argue that more recently infected have a higher chance of getting detected than earlier detected people. So, than earlier infected people. So, N sub t should be proportional to recently infected, not total infected. Now, beta SU represents the most recently infected number. And we also can make the assumption that number of infected people doesn't change dramatically over a period of few days. So we can take some k times beta SU to represent the size of recently infected, and a fraction of that is set to n sub t. So that delta times k I'm going to write as a new parameter epsilon. So n sub t is set to epsilon beta SU. Good byproduct of this is the analysis becomes quite easy. And since we are all IITians here, I can do a bit of differential equation derivation here. If you just compare the equations for u and t with this substitution for n sub t, you see that these are very similar equations. And in fact, if you set epsilon hat to epsilon over 1 minus epsilon, you can combine them to get this differential equation, which should look very familiar to all of you. This is a standard exponential, that is equation whose solution is exponential. That is t is epsilon hat u plus a times e to the minus gamma t. Now this is a fast decaying exponential, and within a short period of time, the effect of this becomes negligible. And t therefore converges to epsilon hat t, or u converges to t over epsilon hat. So this provides a very nice relationship between the size of undetected and size of tested positive groups. Similarly, we can get a relationship between RU and RT of a very similar kind. The only difference here is that there is a constant of integration C, which is required. Now, n sub t we have defined to be epsilon beta SU. Now, with the learning we have, derivations we have made so far, if we do the substitution and just simplify things up, we get n sub t is equal to some constant times t minus some constant times this epsilon t plus RT times t, and convert it by multiplying the underlying population. We get t hat is equal to this constant times nt hat plus this constant times t hat plus RT hat times t hat. And this constant you set to the value b, so that is b is equal to 1 over beta 1 minus epsilon 1 minus c, and e is equal to 1 over epsilon rho 1 minus c. T hat therefore becomes this. And this is exactly what we had hypothesized the equations to be. The reported active infections, the reported new infections, and reported removals satisfy this equation. This is the fundamental equation of the model, which we call fundamental sutra. The nice thing about the derivation is that we also now learn what is the meaning of these constants b and e. They are related to the parameters of the model in this fashion. So what are the parameters we have introduced? Well, beta, gamma, eta were the earlier ones anyway. We have now introduced 3 more actually. Epsilon turns out to be a ratio of detected to total infections. So if we can estimate epsilon, we can estimate total infections. C is that constant of integration, and rho is the reach of the pattern. So 6 parameters in all. So how challenging is it to estimate these 6 parameters? We found challenging in SIR model to estimate 3 parameter values. Well, the good news is that some of these parameters are connected via an equation whose quantities are the reported numbers, which are obviously known. So if you look at this equation, we had time series values of t hat, we have time series values of nt hat, we have time series values of RT hat. Therefore, standard linear regression allows us to compute B and E. And that's what we do from the data compute this. We have already observed that these values of B and E change with time. And in fact, India timeline, as I mentioned, can be split into 11 phases. So when they change, we call it a phase changes occurred. Why does a phase change occur? Well, if there is a lockdown, this rate at which infection is spreading reduces, so that reduces beta. If there is a new mutant like Delta mutant, when it came up, it causes faster spread, thereby increasing beta. If you change your testing policies, you change the fraction of the cases you detect. So that will change epsilon. When the infection spreads to newer areas in the region, well, that obviously increases reach or rho. Also, it's reasonable to assume that when each phase change occurs, that means the parameter, some of the parameter values change to a new set of values. They don't change overnight. Instead, there is a drift for a few days period. And then and during that period, these values are changing constantly and then they stabilize. So this part, the initial part of a phase, we call the drift phase, and then there is a remaining part we call the stable phase. Now with these explanations, all those questions are answered. The Sutra model shows why the equation holds for majority of days and also explains why it doesn't hold for some days, because that's a drift period. And that's why the equation doesn't hold. And finally, the value of E, why it was large and coming down and then stabilizing to a small value. Well, if you noticed in the definition of E, the E is 1 over rho times epsilon times some 1 minus C. So rho, the reach of the pandemic, is in the denominator. And as we can guess, initially rho is very close to 0, which makes E very, very large. And as rho increases, E keeps coming down. And towards the end, the reach will kind of stabilize close to 1. And that's the reason why E also stabilizes. Well, we still haven't been able to estimate all parameters, and I'll not go through this. There is a way. Right now, I have shown you how to estimate B and E. That doesn't yet give us the value of rho and beta. It turns out there is a very nice way of estimating beta and rho using the derivations or the relationship that holds between the detected and undetected infections, and setting up a function whose fixed point is the correct value of the parameters. And it turns out that this function is very nicely behaved. It has a unique fixed point. At least experimentally, we can show that, and that it can be found out quite easily. And then we can get the value of all the 6 parameters in the model. So what do we get about India when we do this analysis for the Indian data? As I said, India has gone through 11 phases. These are the start times of the phases, and these are this second column shows the drift period, initial drift period for each phase. The fourth column is interesting one. This shows the value, how the value of beta has changed with time. Before the lockdown in the March last year, beta was about 0.33, and this plus minus, this range denotes the 95% confidence interval for the beta value or any other parameter value. Now, then the lockdown came, phase changed, beta came down and came down further, and it stayed quite low, about half of what it was earlier, until end of October. And then the festival season came and beta climbed up to an extent, still not too high, remained there until end of January, beginning February, I should say. And then came the Delta variant. And as you can see, the Delta variant caused from 10th February there is a drift of 40 days, so the beta changed quite over quite a period of time because it had a very large value to rise up to 0.39, almost double. And then by April, many states had imposed restrictions which caused the beta to come down to 0.29. And by June end, restrictions were getting lifted, so beta has at the moment climbed up to close to 0.4. The gamma parameter we fixed to 0.1. Gamma, if you recall, is the rate of removal, and it's been reasonably well established that this is something that doesn't change with time, and the usual estimated average recovery removal rate is 1 in 10 days of infection. So that fixes the value of gamma to 0.1. Now let's come to this 1 over epsilon column. We can estimate through the analysis of data the value of all parameters in all phases, except for the value of parameter epsilon in first phase. In order to estimate that, we need calibration of the model with one zero survey. So, and that zero survey can be at any point in time, doesn't have to be done during first phase. So what we have done is we've taken the latest ICMR zero survey and calibrated the model using that zero survey. And that's represented by this fact that that calibration gives initial value of 1 over epsilon to be 31, which means that a 1 in 31 positive cases was detected during phase 1. And somewhat surprisingly, that number hasn't changed at all. I mean, it has risen up a little bit, 31.1, but that's it. Even with respect to 95% confidence interval, there's hardly any change. And finally, let's look at the value of the reach of the pandemic. As you would expect, initially it was very close to 0. This is written in percentages. Still very, even in, let's say, May, up to May, it was quite low. And then it rose quite rapidly to somewhere close to 40% by mid of August. So the question is, what is this cause of this rapid rise? Quite significant rise. Well, if you recall, that was a period of reverse migration in the country. A lot of migrant workers returned to their native places. Many of them carried the virus with them. And that impact of that is clearly shown here. Then the reach kind of stayed around the same value, increasing only slightly when the Delta variant was initially spreading. And then came this huge jump. This is starting March end with a drift period of 26 days. So about over a period of 1 month, essentially in April, the reach almost doubled. And then it remained the same, and only by again June end, things when the restrictions were lifted, it has gone up again. So by now, one can safely assume that the pandemic is covered almost the entire population of the country. Now, with all those parameter estimations, here is the plot of the pandemic. The blue line is the daily new infections taken average over 7 days to eliminate weekly variations. And the orange line is what is computed by the model. And it's a fairly good match with what actually happened. So that is the past. Now let's come to the future. What can we say through the model about the future of the planet? Well, firstly, for catering to the future, we have to incorporate in the model vaccination and also loss of immunity. There have been reported cases of reinfections, which means somebody was infected, developed immunity, and then lost it. Fortunately, it can be very easily incorporated in the model, and by changing the value of rho and beta by a certain multiplicative factor, both loss of immunity and vaccination-induced immunity can be incorporated. Now, in order to predict the future, we have to also assume certain vaccination rate. So up to July is the actual data. August, September, October, November, I've taken the data as projected by the government. This is the bottom number denotes the number of vaccine shots in crores in a month. Now, we also we created 3 scenarios for the future because we do not know when certain events will happen. The assumptions, first is the status quo scenario, as things are today. Assumptions made under this is that about 25% of population infected before the second wave have lost immunity as of now. And that's because Delta variant has been able to bypass immunity of earlier variants to a larger extent. But since most of the people in India got infected by the Delta variant, and the immunity against that will last for a longer period in more people. So we are assuming 12.5% of population infected during second wave loses immunity after 3 months and remaining stay immune. Regarding vaccination, we assume that 30% of population becomes immune after 1 month of first shot, and another 30% becomes immune after 1 month after second shot. This incorporates the fact that while vaccines provide immunity against severe infections to almost everyone, they can still infect. And for Delta variant has been estimated about 40% of immune vaccinated people may get infected. And finally, we assume that beta restrictions get lifted and beta increases to 0.4. Well, then the next is a pessimistic scenario. The first 2 infections assumptions are the same. Third assumes a slightly lower immunity provided by vaccines. And most importantly, we assume a faster spreading mutant comes by August end, making beta to be 0.5. There's an intermediate scenario where the first 3 assumptions remain the same, and the fourth is assumes no new mutant. And when we plot this under this assumption, the 3 scenarios, this is this is what is up to so far. And these are the 3 curves that you get. The green and the mustard are the status quo and the intermediate scenarios. As you can see, there is hardly any difference between them. The purple is the pessimistic scenario, which assumes a new mutant. Still, even in the pessimistic scenario, the peak is nowhere close to the second wave peak, closer to the first wave peak, about 150,000 infections a day. For the other, it's more like 60 to 70,000 infections a day. So the conclusion of this is that the third wave is likely to be a ripple, because so far we have seen no signs of a new variant. But in case a new variant does come at some point in time, there will be higher numbers, but not too high, as long as the immunity provided by Delta variant stays in most of the people. So coming to the strengths and weaknesses of our model, its strengths clearly, firstly, is probably the most important one, is that it can estimate the parameter values directly from data. As already shown when I discussed the India dateline, it can provide an excellent understanding of what happened in the past, which action caused what change, and what were the repercussions of that. It can provide future projections also up to medium term, as long as the parameter values which are holding as of today, they do not change. The predictions will be pretty good. It can incorporate easily the immunity loss and vaccination-induced immunity. And finally, we can use it to simulate what-if scenarios, just like I did 3 scenarios for future. There are still weaknesses in the model. Perhaps the most important one is that when the parameter values are changing and we are in the drift phase, the predictions of the model go wrong because model is unable to estimate what will be the eventual values to which the parameters will stabilize. In the drift period, that is not known. So the predictions go wrong. And a related weakness is that it cannot predict the future values of parameters, because it's really not easy at all to predict the future values. So that leaves more work for future to further improve the model. Firstly, that function f, one would like to prove formally that it has a unique fixed point. And more interestingly, using more analytical methods to somehow predict what will be the stable values of parameter during the drift phase. So parameter can see the parameter values are changing day by day, and one would like to get a good method which can predict what will be the eventual value of the parameter. If you can do that, then the predictivity of the model will improve. Well, that's all I had to say. Thank you very much for listening patiently, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. I think it was such an elegant presentation of ACIR model as you started, and then shortcomings, taking into the analysis in line, the observed data, and then moving to the prediction. I think fantastic piece of work, and proof of the pudding is in that match that you showed in the predicted and the observed values. And let's hope that the predicted going forward, at least the pessimistic scenario doesn't happen. I like those two bottom lines, the mustard and the green ones. But the question that I have, sir, just to kick it off, and I request our audience also to now start putting your questions either in the chat window, or we can unmute you if you raise your hand and ask you. You can ask Professor Agarwal the question directly. Let me kick it off. There are, while this model has proved its value in the population level analysis and tracking it to the actual values, and as you mentioned, the trick was that the observed values of reported infections is so different from the actual, very high numbers that are the undetected or the unreported ones. This is a crucial discovery that you have made, and it's come at it purely from the computer science and mathematics angle. There are other models which have tried to do the same thing with very granular predictive models, but they are computationally very much more difficult. I know that IISc has a model, IIT Bombay has a model, even TCS. I see my colleague Shovik Bharat in the audience. We have created a model based on Pune data, very granular and so on. Are there any trade-offs in doing very specific models to a city like Bombay or Pune or Bangalore versus doing this with relatively much less computational overhead, but reasonable accuracy at the national level? Are there any contrasting comments that you might have, sir?
Oh, yes, there are two very different approaches to modeling. both have their advantages and disadvantages. The advantages of the granular model is that you can really simulate impact of very small changes in your strategy. Things like, okay, cordon of this particular region, what would happen? What will be the impact? That granular model will allow you to, simulate all such strategies at a very fine level. So these are ideally suited for city level simulation, because even at city level, the simulations are very computationally intensive. The drawback of these models is that the estimation of parameters of this model cannot be done with data, because there are just way too many parameters, because every individual is modeled as a separate agent. So, and every individual is governed, behavior of individual is governed by some parameters. So one has to actually estimate nearly all the parameters if you make a good estimate, then these models will work quite well. The advantage of a model like ours is that it's a high-level model that you can capture the behavior of a region of any size with this. It is not granular, so it doesn't provide you that fine-tune ability to make small changes and see what is going to happen. The number of parameters are very few, so all you can do is tweak those parameters, but one big advantage is that this model, Sutra model, is a kind of a plug and play. That give me any region of any place in the world. All I need is a daily new infection data time series. And within half an hour, one can do the simulation of that region, come up with parameter values, how they change, and so on. So one doesn't need to know any specific information about the region to be able to run the. So yeah, both advantages and disadvantages in cases.
In fact, that response of yours, sir, is a nice segue to a question that I see on the chat from Sendil. Could we see projections for the US and other countries going through the Delta wave as we speak? Because again, there has been a bit of an upsurge in those countries as well. So have you done any experimental models on the resurgence in those countries?
Yes, indeed I have. Let me pull out the US one. I must confess that don't stay very up to date with respect to these simulations, because of a lot of my time has been going into doing simulations within India. But I can show you the US one, surely. Here is. Okay, so if you could see this plot, this is the entire US timeline.
Yeah.
Downstairs, you can't see the dates at all. Try to fix this. Yeah. So blue line represents the actual daily new infections, 7-day averages, and the orange one represents the simulation by the model. So what the model is predicting for future of the US is when I did the simulation last, that was like end of July, that the peak will be around 170 to 180,000 infections a day towards August end. So we will see how it pans out, but that's the projection from the model.
It's almost 70% of their previous peak, which is quite severe.
Yes, that's right.
Interesting. So there are two more questions, sir, on the chat. One is from Shovik Bharat. Is there any way to estimate the drift phase? That is, how many days a drift phase will continue for a given phase? Because we saw the drift was going up 40
Right.
and then 25 and so on. Is there an estimation model for the drift phase parameter itself?
Not yet. We haven't really looked at it. See, when the reach changes, beta changing doesn't cause a lot of drift because it's when 10 days, let's say the median drift period is about 10 days. But then there are exceptions. When reach changes quite dramatically, then the drift is longer because it's really going into newer and newer regions. So it takes more number of days to spread.
So that might be interesting future work as well. Couple more
Very
questions.
Absolutely, yes.
Thanks. So a couple of questions. One is from Shekhar Priyadarshi, one of our senior most members. He's an IIT Kharagpur alumnus. What is the probability of the pandemic continuing for wave 3, wave 4, wave 5, wave 6 over many years? I mean, something like a bouncing ball, reducing in amplitude, a damped harmonic motion kind of a thing. But have you done any?
It would. I mean, they make such ripples may be there, but it looks like that we will not go through a major wave any longer, as long as this immunity lasts. So, and there are very strong indicators that immunity, even during the early months of last year, is still continuing most of the people. And remember that immunity was given by the alpha variant, whereas now the delta variant, which is like far more nasty, has come and gone in India, mostly gone from India. And those immunity provided to go infected with alpha, most of them could withstand delta also. So somehow it seems like the immunity given by infection is very long lasting. And if that continues to hold, then one need not worry about future. We don't, I mean, with 70% of the population already immune, we don't expect to see any significant wave.
So the parameter that you'd shown, that the 93%, I think, was the last number of people who have been exposed either in wave 1, wave 2 cumulatively. So that is what you're tracking against that seropositivity surveys and so on. So is that understandable?
No, that's not seropositivity. No, that is when I say the reach of the pandemic is a parameter that measures over what fraction of population is the pandemic currently active. Now, this fraction of population consists of susceptible, infected, removed, all put together.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right, and with time, of course, susceptible get infected and move, but there is a fraction which is outside the reach, meaning the virus has not even been able to touch them. I mean, to take an extreme example, suppose, and many people have done it, that at the beginning of the pandemic, they completely isolated themselves and stopping interaction with anyone outside. So such people are really outside the reach. Virus can't even reach them. So they don't, and of course, obviously that some remote parts of the country and others where maybe the virus hasn't reached yet. There were many before the second wave. The second wave really reached all.
So so I get that picture. These are people who are, in some ways herd protected because of whatever distance and so on. In fact, Prabha has a question, sir, which is kind of related. Does the model are very different from granular as one state?
So yeah, so Kerala is a unique case. They are a victim of their own earlier success. So they initially adopted a strategy last year of very aggressive containment of the pandemic, which in terms of our model translates to limiting the reach to a very small percentage of population. And they were quite successful. By August last year, the reach was only 3%. Even by February this year, reach was only 25%. So that means 75% of the population was still not touched by the virus. But the Delta variant kind of messed up with their strategy. By June, the reach had really hit 95%. So it practically spread all over the state. Now, the downside of limiting the reach is that since most of the people are not even touched by the virus, so they stay susceptible. And the moment the virus touches them, they become prone to infection. And that is why the low seropositivity in Kerala, and that is why you see larger number of infections there. It will continue until they cross 70% infected population. They will continue suffering through this. They have a option choice. They can lock down to control the numbers, but that will induce economic misery and mental misery. I mean, people are tired of restrictions.
Or they could ramp up vaccinations dramatically high.
Yeah, well, that's not feasible. I mean, the vaccines availability is limited.
Yeah.
And all the other choice is just let it spread. If I were to give a recommendation, I would say let it spread. Take a hit for 15, 20 days. You have to be fully geared up to handle that surge, and then you're done.
It's a very tough set of decisions, sir. I agree. These are things that we will probably grapple with in many parts of the world. There aren't any more questions on the chat as I can see. So I'd like to conclude with one generic question, sir, that, thank you first of all for explaining this to us at the Alumni Center in Chennai. The broader question that I'd like to end with is, what role do you see alumni playing in this kind of fantastic translational research that the IITs are doing? You've solved a very contemporary problem in such a beautiful way. How would you like us to play a role in helping the IITs? Perhaps your experience with the Technology Innovation Hub that you're heading. Just a generic question to conclude today's session.
Yeah. There are actually a lot of activity going on in nearly all IITs, be it old or even new ones, which is targeted more towards applied research. And that is primarily due to new generation of faculty who have come in. People at my generation or senior generation were like content on publishing papers and teaching, but the younger generation is not. And that's why even in new IIT, which consists of all new faculty, young faculty, they are also very active towards this. And as many of you may know, 25 technology innovation hubs have been set up in nearly all IITs with the explicit target of not only doing R&D, but also working with the industry to do the translation and help in the deployment, promote startups in a big way in whatever domain their hub is, and of course, do a lot of training of people in the technologies. So there are groups in each IIT who are very actively working in these hubs, and not just hubs, many kind of translation research. So I think this is a great time for alumni to engage with IITs and see what is there something which is happening there which they can make use of, take it towards deployment and application, which may, I mean, there are so many success stories that is coming out in recent years. I'm not, let's say, familiar with all of them, but I can give you examples from IIT Kanpur, which are more known to me. The ventilator project was a big success. It was a completely indigenous excellent ventilator, was designed in collaboration with alumni of IIT and IIT faculty. So these two groups came together, came up with the ventilator, which has proved to be very successful. There are so many other examples of this kind. So I think that there is a great opportunity that exists now. And this is only going to increase with time. So I think things are looking quite up, I would say.
Thank you, sir. I think the alumni centers, hopefully, which are going to come up in all the research parks, like we have our alumni center now in the IIT Madras Research Park. These are bringing together IIT alumni who live in a particular city. So I am, for example, a Delhi alumnus, but I live in Chennai, so I'm a part of the IIT Madras ecosystem because the center gives us a club kind of an ambience, informal get together, faculty, startups, industry, and so on. So that kind of mix, I take it that is the right direction. So we hope to see many more alumni centers coming up in the research parks all over the country and taking that vision forward. So thank you again, sir, and for an excellent lecture. The recording will be up on the site, alumni center site shortly. So I request you to make sure that's publicized well. For our audience, the next session is actually tomorrow. This is partnering with IIT Madras Alumni Association, and I'll be interviewing Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy on India's 5G journey and specifically the 5GI initiative that he's been spearheading. And the next two sessions are lighter than these serious topics. 21st August, Saturday, we have Meenakshi Ramesh hosting our first quiz. And on August 28th, we have a storytelling session curated by Lavanya Srinivas to mark the Chennai day, which is just the week before that. So look forward to seeing you all tomorrow, and also with the quiz and the storytelling. And once again, my thanks to Professor Agarwal for such a fantastic session. Thank you all. And have a
Thank you.
Thank you.